Hello and welcome to ELT Cast, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. Today is August 20th, 2023. In today's episode 116, I'll share with you a recent video that I created for students who are taking a Teaching Workshop 2 course, a semester course helping them design 15-minute lessons. And in this episode, I am talking about lesson planning and actually showing an example and my rationale behind the creation of this lesson plan. If you have any thoughts, insights, or would like to share any of your experiences related to today's topic, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle at BNLEEZ. So, without further ado, let's get to the video. For those of you who are taking Teaching Workshop 2, I want to spend a few minutes today talking about a lesson plan, actually showing you an example of a lesson plan that we've talked a little bit about for our 15-minute lesson. And I want to provide an example, not to necessarily say you need to do exactly what I'm doing, but I hope that through my sharing of my example and some of the things I was thinking about and my approach to putting together ideas for this lesson plan, this will give you some insight, hopefully, in how you can approach your own lesson planning. So it's very important that each of you follows your own preferences as a teacher, your own way, your own approach based on your educational philosophy, how you think your students best learn an additional language, how they learn English as an additional language. So again, make sure that, especially in the rationale, we'll look at that here in a minute, that you're drawing on theoretical concepts that allow you to justify or explain your reasoning behind your lesson plan and later the lesson itself. All right, so I'll share this document with you, but I'll go through here and talk a little bit about how I put together some ideas for this lesson plan. And I'm going to try to recall as best I can the order in which I designed or I was thinking about this lesson. One thing that I did not do is start at the beginning at the very top of the document and work down in order, okay? I very much did not do that. I jumped around. So I'm going to try, I didn't actually write down the exact order that I did this, but I'll try to recall as best I can my approach to putting together some ideas here. But my point is that when you're getting started, and sometimes when we're looking at a blank lesson plan, sometimes it might be hard to determine, what do I do? What do I want to do for this class? For this particular exercise, one of the first things I thought about was that the actual time frame. Okay, so in this case, I knew that I had 15 minutes that I had to account for this particular lesson plan. So that was one of the things that I thought about in the early stages, as what do I need to, or what can I put together to fill up these 15 minutes? And I knew at the beginning that I wanted to do a general English class. I first thought about a basic level, and as I completed the lesson plan, I changed it from an A1 level to an A2 level. And I did think about a high school level early on also, but that's about it. Of course, the teacher, observer, and the person who's going to record the video is not all that important, but I didn't really think of a topic per se. I actually started, once I knew that I wanted to plan for a 15-minute general English class, I jumped down here to the learning objectives. Now, I left a note here, but let me explain what I mean by learning objectives and revisit again the idea of language objectives versus content objectives. These are some topics that we've talked about in class, and I want to explain again these two types of objectives, and I also want to think about the learning objective. Now, the learning objective is really a combination of both the content objective and the language objective, and it's in the form of one sentence. So here in this case, I have the following learning objective, and this was something I did early on from the very beginning of my planning process. And it begins, English language learners will understand that maintaining a strong friendship requires give and take by having them create a SWOT analysis, that is a list of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, related to one close friend and discussing this with a partner using key vocabulary discussed in class. So you'll notice here we've got two main sections in this one sentence that is our learning objective. The first, starting at the beginning, English language learners will understand that maintaining a strong friendship, and taking us all the way to a strong friendship that requires give and take. Okay, so that is going to be the content objective. We can also refer to this as the understanding. English language learners will understand that maintaining a strong friendship requires give and take. So that's the content objective. That's the understanding. That's the context, the idea that that we want to work with our students for this particular lesson. And I would categorize that as being the content objective. Now, after the preposition by, where it continues, by having them create a SWOT analysis. Now, from this point, by having them create a SWOT analysis related to one close friend and discussing this with their partner using key vocabulary discussed in class, then this is classified here as, I'm considering this the language objectives. So this is the second part of the learning objectives, where I have the language objectives, and I'm listing them out here more specifically, but you'll notice that the language objectives and the content objectives go together. One is basically a means for the other. So the language allows us to talk about the content, and the content provides us context or a reason to try to express ourselves through language in this regard. So I've listed these separate, the learning objectives and then the related language objectives and content objectives that I think also align with the learning objectives. And if you are putting together your own lesson plan and you want to keep just having the language objectives and content objectives only and work within those two areas, that's fine. If you want to present your learning objective also, that's also another option. But I wanted to show you the relevance, how the content and language objectives come together to, in this case, form an overall learning objective that I'm assigning to this 15-minute lesson. So here we have language objectives. Students will be able to identify and use new vocabulary related to past experiences with one close friend, pronunciate words needed to converse with a partner, speak in the past tense, that is, regular and irregular verbs, to discuss opportunities and threats, and speak in the present tense to describe personal characteristics. And brainstorm a list of words and phrases that relate to past experiences with a close friend, listen and respond to a partner. And I have some other key performance verbs that I am looking for. All right, and I have here listed: judge their friendship, connect with someone who is similar and different, adapt to difficult circumstances, analyze a friendship using SWOT, share personal beliefs, reflect and self-assess on past experiences. Now I'm getting these performance verbs: judge, connect, adapt, analyze, share beliefs, reflect, and self-assess. So these performance verbs all relate to the 6 facets of understanding. Okay, and I'm not going to go into a deep dive here, but I've included a link that takes you to these 6 facets. And what I've done is choose certain performance verbs that are in these different 6 facets that I think are most applicable, or at least that I am anticipating that these might emerge in this particular lesson. But notice that I am not forcing these verbs there in terms of I'm trying to set up an environment where these different performance verbs can emerge, but we're not going to know with certainty exactly which verbs are going to emerge. But whenever you're planning a lesson, the idea is to think of an experience that you can create for your learners where these 6 facets, or at least some of these 6 facets, may emerge. Okay, and this could also be in the way that you present questions, how you design the class, how you design the activity of the lesson or the task. And a lot has to do with your design and what you're asking them to do. You have a lot of influence in how students are likely to explore some of these performance verbs. But the idea is to not rely on one particular facet for a certain activity, that you try to include a variety of these 6 facets. So I started off with the learning objective and wrote out similar language and content objectives. Now, I kept coming back to the language objectives as I was progressing through the rest of the lesson. After I completed the learning objective, I created a list of language objectives and content objectives that were not complete. It wasn't exactly how it appears here. I jumped down actually at that point and completed the procedure. And this is where I was basing my 15 minutes that I have for this particular lesson and came up with these stages. Now I'm going to call these stages under procedure. I'm going to call each one of these a different stage, where I think some of us might be used to different terminology. Maybe we call it an activity. I think what's most important here is the name that you are comfortable giving each of these sections. And I would suggest that you choose a label. I would suggest that you label each of these stages in a way that is more representative of what it is. So, for example, instead of the word activity, activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, maybe you label it what it is that you're doing. What would you call that activity, that task that you're asking your students to do? Now, in my example, these are the labels that I chose. So I start off with a warm-up. Okay, you can call this an introduction. You can call it a warm-up. But this is what I chose to call it, a warm-up. Now, in my case, my warm-up is going to be where I greet the students, introduce the topic with the following question. So the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask a question. What makes a true friend? Then I'm going to instruct the students to refer to their picture of their close friend while thinking about the answer to the question. Students were asked in a prior class to bring a picture of the close friend to class. So here I'm providing some context. I'm actually explaining here, assuming that there was a class before this one, and I'd ask students to bring a picture with them to class. Solicit answers from students and create an online word cloud of keywords and phrases. All right, now the keywords and phrases, this is where I'm going to be using a screen. I'm in the class and I'm thinking about as I'm warming up, this is one to many. This is me as their instructor talking to the whole group, asking this question and soliciting responses. And as they're giving me responses, I'm going to be adding keywords or phrases to this online word cloud. So that at the end of this 3-minute warm-up, we're going to have a word cloud that is going to remain it's going to remain visible to them, available to them, that they can draw on or use throughout the rest of the lesson. So this is my warm-up, 3 minutes. It's a whole group warm-up. Then I'm going to go to the second stage of my procedure, which I'm calling critical thinking and personal reflection. So this is where instead of using the word like activity 1, I'm just going to label it. And for me, when I look at what I'm asking students to do in the second stage, this is the label I chose: critical thinking and personal reflection. Students refer to any keywords or phrases from the online word cloud to create a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That is, they're going to think of their friend, their close friend, think about the strengths of their friendship, their weaknesses of their friendship, opportunities in the past that they have had, and threats in their friendship that they have had in the past. And students are going to be asked to also consider any additional vocabulary required to complete their lists. I'm going to be asking them to create a short list, 3 to 4 items per section. So 3 or 4 strengths, 3 or 4 weaknesses, 3 or 4 opportunities, 3 or 4 threats. The students are to include different verbs for each point. Different verbs. Okay, so verbs in the present tense are going to be used to describe strengths and weaknesses. These are characteristics that still that their friends still have, and verbs in the past tense to describe past opportunities and threats that they've experienced with this close friend. Students are going to be encouraged to use a dictionary, and they can use either a physical dictionary or an online dictionary depending on if they have a Wi-Fi connection. This activity, they're going to be given a choice. They can work individually or in pairs. And I'm assigning 4 minutes to complete this task. So this goes in now to my third stage of my procedure, the practice stage. And again, I'm just calling this practice. This doesn't mean that all of you have to use the same label. It doesn't mean that you have to follow the same type of procedure as I'm following here. So I just chose the label practice. And in this stage, based on their SWOT analysis, students are assigned random partners to discuss the question, what makes a true friend? By having them refer to their SWOT analysis. So they're going to have a guide. They're going to have something in writing that they created on their own using a dictionary, using different verbs that they wrote out. And they're going to have now an opportunity to converse with someone else using that as a guide. Students are to maintain a conversation by both answering the question, what makes a true friend, and comparing and contrasting their responses. That is, they're going to be encouraged to have a conversation. Both of them will be asked to describe their true friend in terms of their SWOT analysis, and then compare any of their own experiences, compare or contrast any of their own aspects of their own SWOT analysis. This is pair work. They're going to be working with a partner, and I'm allocating 5 minutes to complete this stage. Now, the assessment here, I was actually going back and forth on how to best or where to place assessment in this lesson plan. And I'm not really convinced that this is the best place to include it, because it's not really it is part of the procedure, but it's not isolated. Okay, so I just chose to put assessment here. And, now that I'm thinking about it, probably I could put assessment at the very top, even before the warm-up, because the assessment occurs throughout the entire lesson. That is, assessment is being applied in the warm-up, in the critical thinking and personal reflection stage, and in the practice stage. It's pretty much filtered through the entire process of the class, except maybe perhaps at the very end. So I am listing it here. Assessment occurs throughout the lesson in the form of observation, questioning, reviewing worksheets, conversations I'm having with students. I don't think I even mentioned that. Just overall monitoring and offering feedback while listening to the conversations. This is going to be primarily in the practice stage. And the closure. The lesson concludes with a review of keywords from the online word cloud. So we're going to revert again back to the online word cloud. We're going to talk about any additional words that emerged from the pair work the conversations. If I'm walking around and certain keywords came up that weren't discussed at the beginning of the class, or maybe the students themselves have additional words that came up, this will be a time here at the end of the class where those additional vocabulary can emerge. And this is going to be a whole group. To close the class, I'm allocating around 3 minutes. All right, so this basically is my procedure that I came up with, and this was the order. When I finished the procedure, I did go back to the language objectives and added a little bit of information. Okay, so I jumped back and completed a little bit more based on what I was thinking about in the procedure. Then I completed the differentiated instruction section, and here I have differentiating content came in the form of having each student choose a friend and base their prior experiences with this person. I also differentiated the process and possibly the environments based on giving them a choice as to whether or not they are going to use either electronic dictionary or not. And also giving them a choice if they want to work individually or with a partner during the critical thinking and personal reflection stage. So once I finished the differentiation section of my lesson plan, then I jumped back up and added friendship here as the overall topic. And I went to the rationale. So I actually did the rationale towards the end of my lesson planning process. Start off by talking about the sequencing of the procedure, okay? And this is based on the gradual release of responsibility. Essentially, what I tried to do in these, in the procedure section of this 15-minute class was to start off with the idea that students were going to be a little bit more dependent on what we're doing in class. And as we are progressing through the 15 minutes and working towards the latter part of this lesson, that they are being a little bit more dependent and productive in the sense that they're speaking. And so this is a very, it's kind of on a small scale when you think of a lesson that's only 15 minutes. I teach a listening and speaking class that is for 10 hours a week, 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And I take the same approach, this gradual release of responsibility, and to apply to this 10-hour course, whereas towards the beginning of the class, maybe let's say Monday and Tuesday, they are a little bit more dependent on what they're doing, or they're dependent on me and looking for support, whereas towards the end of the week, they're being more independent, even interdependent, in helping their fellow classmates complete the task as well. So this gradual release of responsibility can be seen in terms of, in a small scale, just a 15-minute class, which is what my attempt is here, but it can also apply to longer time frames. But the idea is to gradually release the responsibility where students are a little bit more independent, and in our case, as English language teachers, that our students are being more productive. I also see this as maybe there is more of a focus towards the beginning of the lesson on listening, and maybe in another context, reading, the receptive skills. Towards the end of the lesson, they're more productive. Maybe they're focusing on speaking, or maybe in some cases, writing. Okay, but in my case, we're only focusing on speaking. So I have this as part of my rationale. I also have the lesson includes only formative assessment. I mentioned assessment below in the procedural section, but here's my rationale. The type of assessment is formative, so there are no grades associated with this lesson. I am offering only formative assessment that is meant to promote learning. And I'm using the positive evidence recasts to help students when they make errors. So positive evidence recast simply means that when students are making errors, I'm not calling them out. I'm not stating in front of the whole group, no, that's not right. That's you made a mistake. Or you could even be nice about it, but still offer negative evidence recast. You could say that, well, that's not quite right. So I'm basically not using that approach and only sticking to positive evidence. And what that is when a student makes a mistake, I simply model the correct language. So I only model, I might repeat what the student meant to say. I might model the correct version of it, but I'm not going to even mention that a mistake has been made. So the idea with a positive evidence recast is that over time, as students are becoming a little bit more familiar with the language that they are using, they're more apt to be able to distinguish between their version of the language and, in this case, the instructor, someone else. And as they are seeing differences, when they notice, well, the teacher said it like this, but I said it like this, maybe I should say it like the teacher's saying it. All of that is happening automatically without anyone even talking about it. And so the idea with positive evidence recast is that you're not calling out students or putting any additional pressure on their basic risk-taking, right? Because speaking another language, they're taking all kinds of risks. They might be afraid of making mistakes. So the idea is that you are not calling out those mistakes in hopes that students are having more confidence speaking the language. And over time, as they become more familiar with the language, they are able to identify changes in their own version of the language and then make those changes accordingly themselves. The third thing I have here for a rationale, the content objective, is based on Wiggins and McTighe's understanding by design, specifically the 6 facets of understanding. So this learning objective is very much a type of understanding. English language learners will understand that maintaining a strong friendship requires give and take. The second part, by having them create a SWOT, is a little bit more tailored to the language objectives. Okay, so the 6 facets of understanding really pertain mainly to this first part of the learning objectives that I have here. From English language learners to where it says requires give and take, this first part. Okay, so this is some of the rationale here that I thought of for this particular lesson. This is the theory that relates to some of what I have here. And at that point, when I completed my rationale, I jumped down here and I finished the anticipated issues. Some students may need sentence prompts to help them facilitate conversing with a classmate. Also, I may need to prepare examples of filler words or discourse markers to help students segue their ideas, asking for clarification, or if they're not sure what they want to say. Right, so here I could, in fact, even as I'm thinking about this, I could include here in the critical thinking and personal reflection additional prompts on the board that would help them whenever they get into the practice stage. Maybe we talk about it, maybe as I'm thinking about this now, I could even go back and maybe add more to that if I think that's necessary. I could just see how it goes. It really depends on the students, and maybe these anticipated issues, I write these down as just as a reminder. So when I'm in the class, it might be something I'm looking for and something that I could adapt in real time as the class is unfolding. Also, if the Wi-Fi connection is an issue, then obviously I can substitute and instead of having an online word cloud, just have just a list of word associations here on the board. I might even tag some words that are more frequent, or maybe use colors or underline or some kind of image or visual to draw out some of the words that are being mentioned more often, more frequently as a substitute for having an online word cloud. All right, so basically that's it. I'm leaving the reflection open. Here are some just key questions that you can consider, or that I can consider when I finish giving my lesson in terms of my own reflection. And as I'm looking at my video, it's always important to look at your video whenever you do your reflection so you can be reminded of what happened. Some of the things maybe you didn't catch or you're just not aware of in the moment when you're teaching. So this is why we do the recording. So when you do your reflection, you're able to go back and see some of the things maybe that you missed. And oftentimes you can just gain insights in seeing what you did in class as you're completing your reflection. And the same goes even for the observation when you're observing your classmates. Okay, of course you're watching them, you're taking notes, but having that recording, you might pick up something that you missed. Okay, so that is basically what I wanted to share with you. I hope this helps, seeing an example of a lesson plan, and hopefully me explaining some of what I was thinking about. Again, this is not a perfect lesson plan. I'm not looking to see if everyone does something similar. Make your own decisions and how you're presenting. You don't even have to use this exact format, but these are things that we'll be talking about: language and content objectives, the rationale, the sequence itself, and how much time you're allocating. Do try to include in your procedure what kind of interactional pattern is going on in each of your sections, each of your stages, and how long are you allocating to spend in each of those stages. Okay, I think we'll stop there. This has been an example of a lesson plan with a little bit of explanation. And again, I hope it helps, guys, and we'll see everybody in class. This concludes today's episode. You've been listening to ELT Cast, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. Thanks for listening.